and welcome again. I'm delighted to be joined this evening by Alastair Savage and Chris Gibb, who will be visiting us at the Cumnock Tryst in October. And in fact, returning by popular demand, Ayrshaw's very own fiddle virtuoso, Alastair Savage, will be with us at one of our late night concerts at the Dumfries Arms Hotel, which is a kind of club night, which has become very popular at the Cumnock Tryst. And he's joined again by an all-star ensemble, including some of Scotland's finest traditional musicians. He's joined on stage by long-time collaborators Ewan Drysdale on guitar piano, the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra's Ian Crawford on double bass, alongside the brilliantly versatile Bronte Hoodnott on flute, and our celebrated piper Chris Gibb. So this should be an exceptional gathering of talent, and it promises a warm celebration of Scotland's rich musical heritage in an evening of spellbinding melodies that will captivate both folk enthusiasts and curious newcomers alike. So I'm joined by Alastair on fiddle and Chris on border pipes. So before talking about the actual music itself, gentlemen, I wonder if we could maybe ask, because I think our listeners and viewers will be very interested in this initially, what have you both been up to recently, either separately or together?
Well, if I go first, I've been busy with Edinburgh Fringe Festival recently. August, really the last few years, has kind of been taken up a lot of time with concerts over in Edinburgh. And what I've actually tried to do the last few years is to try and offer a kind of broad sweep of Scottish fiddle music for people. So rather than just doing one concert with one particular ensemble, for example, this year I did 4 concerts. I did the first one with Thalie Robertson, who's a fantastic clarinet player and composer. James, you maybe know Ailey and her work. She writes quite a bit of music for orchestra. And then the second concert I did was with a fantastic piano player called Lawrence Wilson, who travelled down to the mainland from Orkney. Lawrence is a very sort of fantastic old time, if you would call it that, sort of traditional Canadian piano player. So he came down and did the second concert with me. The third was with Chris and exactly the group you just made reference to that are coming down and playing Cumnock, Chris and Bronte, Ewan and Ian. We played the Canongate Kirk. Great night, I think Chris would agree. We had
absolutely
there with a big audience at the Canongate Kirk. And then the final concert to finish the Fringe was with Gregor Blamey on piano and accordion. Gregor is not only a fantastic musician, but he doubles as my brother-in-law. So he's my wife's sister's husband, or effectively known as the outlaws in the family. So Gregor's fantastic. Kind of instrumentalist. I mean, he plays a lot of jazz music, folk, classical. He can do everything really. So Gregor was the final concert. It's been a kind of busy time in August, and obviously Chris was part of one of those concerts.
Chris, apart from the Canongate concert, what else have you been up to?
Well, recent in the very short time frame, August is for me and for many other pipers is very much taken up by the pipe band world. This year is a very condensed sort of competition season, so that was mainly most of August was taken up with those performances. With the final at the World Championships was the day before Alastair's gig at the Canongate, so that was a kind of short term. And then in terms of over the last kind of year, I think my highlight was probably going to South Korea with Alastair. That was back in, was that November that we did that? I think it was
November time, yeah.
So we went on tour out there, which was a cracking experience. But my main day job is teaching. So we're back in the schools after the holidays and getting right back into it.
Mm-hmm. So, what's your backstory, both of you? What brought you to music? What brought you to the different kind of musical involvements that you have? Your education, your teachers, your influences, and so on.
Well, for me, I mean, it's quite a broad range of things. I mean, so growing up in Ardrossan, my dad is an accordion player, and his background was in Scottish country dance music. So he was involved in dance bands and things like that. And so my earliest experience musically in the house was of the accordion. And I always make a joke about it, actually, as a wee boy in Ardrossan. My dad always did that thing of stamping his foot very loudly when he played the accordion. And with the size of slipper, the sound of the slipper was almost as loud as the noise of the accordion in the next room. So I always joke that it was my first introduction to music was the slipper, accompanied by the accordion in our house in Ardrossan. For whatever reason, my earliest interest though in music was actually in classical guitar music, believe it or not. I started playing guitar at the age of 6. I was very interested in Spanish guitar music, Andres Segovia and that type of thing. But really through my dad's influence, when I got the chance to learn the fiddle at primary school, went in primary in Ardrossan, I was offered a chance to learn the violin, and my dad said, I wasn't that keen to start with. My dad said, well, you can come along and sit with me in the Strathspey Real Society. He was playing in the Ian Prestwick Strathspey Real Society. There was a Strathspey Real Society in Cumnock as well. And there was one started actually in Kilwinning. Just after I started learning the violin at school, there was a Strathspey Real Society just by fortune started very soon after that in Kilwinning. So my dad took me down to the Strathspey Real Society on a Saturday morning, and that opened up a whole new world for me, really. Hearing all these different age groups of players playing Scottish fiddle music. And then alongside that, I joined the Ayrshire Divisional Orchestra, the schools orchestras. I went to Ardrossan Academy for my first couple of years of secondary school, and I was incredibly fortunate. It's like a lot of these things in life you look back on and you don't realise until the aftermath how fortunate really I was, because Ian Tyre, who had been the leader of the BBC Radio Orchestra, came to teach violin in Ardrossan. Now, if you think about that, for a wee boy in Ardrossan, hearing this gentleman played out the violin, I thought everybody played violin like that. It wasn't until later on I realised, no, this man was an incredible virtuoso leading the BBC Orchestra. But that was my early motivation as a player. So from that point on, it was classical music and traditional music together. Divisional orchestras, the Strathspey Real Societies. Went to Douglas Academy Music School when I was 14. And I carried on there, doing the Strathclyde Orchestra and getting all my classical in-depth tuition at Douglas Academy. At the same time, coming home at the weekends, going to watch Cumnock Football Club playing, at other times playing in the Strathspey Real Society alongside my dad. So it was a very diverse background of classical music and traditional music all kind of working together.
That's great. And Chris, you're from Edinburgh originally. What brought you into music?
So I probably came into quite a common route for pipers, certainly. So when I was young, I was in the Boys Brigade, and at that time there was the company that I was in had a pipe band, as many of them did back then, and I learned originally to play pipes through the Boys Brigade. So we were taught just by, well, originally we were quite close to Redford Barracks, so there was a member of the army that used to come down and teach for the first 6 months or so, and we used to go up on a Thursday night. Tuesday night was in the school, Thursday night was up at Redford Barracks, which was terrifying as an 8-year-old boy going up past the soldiers with with our machine guns on the gate, but it certainly focused the mind when you were learning. So, and then it was kind of older guys in the company that taught me. And then I went through the sort of pipe band route through school, and really it kind of took over for me. I loved the whole social side of it. I loved the diversity of the people that were involved in it. Mm-hmm. And I moved to Canada when I was about 19 to the east coast of Canada. Again, just very much the kind of pipe band and solo piping route. But when I was out there, I got exposed to some amazing musicians, mainly sort of Cape Breton style music, which is obviously probably more Scottish than what the Scottish play now. You know, it's very, very unchanged over the centuries. We used to actually go, there was a bootleggers out there that was very well known to the police, to everybody, and any touring musician used to go there on a Tuesday night and have a tune, and it was a wonderful place for meeting amazing musicians, and just it really opened my eyes. Actually, I heard more traditional music out there than I did growing up in Edinburgh, and what I found it more exciting. So it was at that point that I, after a couple of years on the east coast of Canada, I came back and successfully got into it was the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and Drama at that time to do the traditional music course, majoring in piping. And I still have kept the sort of pipe band and solo piping route, but that really got me into playing more with other instruments and other ensembles, which is has been a major part of my love of music.
So these different musical worlds in both your backgrounds, which bring you all together in this ensemble that's coming to Cumnock. There's classical music, there's the Scottish piping tradition, the Scots fiddle music. How does it all work? How does it all come together in what you do with this ensemble?
I mean, from my perspective, so two of the people in the group, Ian Drysdale and Ian Crawford, I mean, I've worked with them. I mean, we first did a record together with that trio over 20 years ago now. I mean, Ewan, actually, he was a trumpet player at the Academy in Glasgow, just kind of, he's a few years older than me, so he was just kind of leaving college at the time I was going to college, but I knew him to speak to, and what always interested me with Ewan was, again, I think with all the members of this group, it's a very sort of diverse interest in a lot of different types of music. I mean, Ewan was a trumpet player by what he was studying, but I quickly became aware of the fact that he was really good on the piano and the guitar, and he was playing in sort of progressive rock groups, and he was really interested in blues and jazz music. And Ian, for example, I mean, I met Ian sort of properly when I joined the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra nearly 30 years ago now. And again with Ian, I went along, he was playing for a while with various sort of folk groups in Glasgow. And again, I became very aware of his sort of diverse outlook in music. He's very into sort of progressive music and progressive rock and jazz. And I think for me, with those two in particular, it's always appealed to me to work with people in the first instance who've kind of quite different backgrounds to your own. So you've maybe got one common thread, which is classical music. But where my background had been very much in traditional music and traditional Scottish fiddle music. Like I say, Ewan was more interested in sort of blues and rock music, and Ian was interested in sort of jazz and progressive music. So the appeal of working for them and working on some albums with them was actually the diversity of all that. I think with more recently with Chris and with Bronte, again, there's that sort of thread of, Chris is involved in education and overseeing, sort of teaching a wide range of instruments. But I've kind of, one thing for me recently, it's all about sort of education for me personally. Like one thing I find with the pipes and the class act that I mentioned earlier, actually working with Ailey Robertson, is those instruments are older than the fiddle actually in Scotland in terms of the popularity in Scotland, going all the way back through the centuries. And in recent times, the aspect of learning for me, what I can actually learn from working with a great piper or working with class act player, again with the flute is a really old instrument in Scotland. I mean, Robert Burns was fond of the flute, so there's something for me of adding in those kind of traditional instrument elements of border pipes and flute alongside this kind of progressive element that's already been in existence is the appeal for me with this particular ensemble. Spoke to Chris. I knew Chris from his work with the orchestra. He'd come in and worked with the orchestra quite a few times in projects. But back in 2023, that particular year at the festival, it'd just been a trio concert I had done with Ian and Ewan, and I was keen to sort of go back to maybe a slightly larger ensemble the following year. And of course, we were already booked by that time to come and play at Cumnock at the Tryst. And there were a few other concerts happening, Westfest in Glasgow and various things. So I spoke to Chris about maybe coming on board to start with for that year for these specific ensemble concerts. Sorry. And with working with Bronte as well in the orchestra, again I was kind of aware of her interest. You sort of pick up on things with people, you know, like when we were doing projects with the orchestra, and for example, you may be doing a contemporary music week, or you're doing a world music week, or you're doing something for Celtic Connections, and you kind of pick up on who's kind of really into it, who's really interested in stuff. And I had a sort of vibe with Bronte that she would be interested in the projects I was doing. That's the kind of background to so that particular ensemble, we played quite a lot of concerts last year, and then this year again we've kind of kept the group together and done a few concerts, and we've got one or two as well as Cumnock. We've got one or two other things coming up. So I don't know, Chris will maybe give you another angle on it all, but that's, from my perspective, that's how it all came into being.
I suppose what we haven't mentioned, Chris, is the instrument that you play, the instruments that you'll be playing, will be known to folk aficionados, people involved in traditional music. Outside that, when you say border pipes, you probably have to explain something about it. What is the connection between border pipes and the pipes that we know, the Highland pipes in Scottish music?
Yeah, so, well, I mean, I think if you, probably the easiest way to go is to go back. So it's not really well known where pipes originated, but it's believed that it was kind of pipes in general. The concept of having a bag with a reeded instrument into it came from kind of the Middle East, and then came across through Europe, Ireland, England, and then sort of eventually ended up in Scotland. So as you travel across Europe, most European countries will have their own version of a bagpipe. And in England and Scotland, there's a few different. It's probably quite well known would be the Northumbrian pipes, which is a bellows blown pipe. And then obviously the most well known would be the Highland pipe. The border pipes are probably somewhere in between. They'd have been very popular, I believe, 17th century. I think originally they would have been either bellows blown or mouth blown. You can certainly still get them as both, but now predominantly musicians playing border pipes would have a bellow, use bellows to play them. They're a much softer sound than the Highland pipes. They're quieter. They are set in the key of A, which is particularly friendly to playing with other instruments. They sit volume-wise and tonally, I think, incredibly well with the fiddle. I think they're just, the two instruments are made to be played together. And I guess probably the 1990s was when there was a bit of a resurgence in the instrument. A couple of instrument makers found plans of and measurements of old instruments and started recreating these border pipes from years gone by, and then developing using modern technology to get the to get them even better than they were. And they've just, I think, because they're so friendly for playing with other instruments, they've really, really taken off. Small pipes, they're quite often confused with small pipes, which again can be bellows or mouth blown. They're a quieter instrument purely because of the shape. It's very technical, but the border pipes are a conical bore, so you can get more of a chromatic scale on them, and they're a bit more projection, whereas the small pipes are a parallel bore in the chanter, so it's probably closer to like a practice chanter that you'd learn the Highland pipes on. But in terms of fingering and everything, they're very much the same as the Highland pipes. It's tonally and the way they're played would be the biggest difference.
Both of you have made reference to the ancient nature of some of these instruments. Alistair, you're talking about instruments that are older than the fiddle, and Chris, you're talking about an instrument that was popular in Scotland in the 17th century and maybe even earlier. Do you, in the folk world, have a similar kind of discussion amongst yourselves about authenticity? You probably know in classical music, there's been a big discussion, debate. So, in fact, the way that a lot of music is performed, early music is performed, is all about authentic approaches. What's the most authentic approach? Do you find that there's that element in folk music? I mean, I had the whistle binkies at the Cumnock Tryst a few years ago, and people always said that they were very authentic, in that they stuck to the basics, as it were, that, as far as the arrangements were concerned, was much more part of the tradition compared to other arrangements that have figured a lot in the Scottish folk scene in recent years. Is that something that crops up in discussions amongst musicians?
Yeah, I mean, I think about it constantly. Like particularly when it comes to sort of planning a program, I'm very particular. Like when we're planning a set list for something like the Cumnock Tryst, is to try and hopefully represent something of the kind of truly ancient and things that are a little bit more progressive. So and things that are kind of in between. So, for example, in the set that we'll do in Cumnock, we always try and do at least one set of tunes that's simply just the fiddle and the border pipes. And when we do that, really strictly sticking to the manuscripts of the ancient tunes themselves. For example, as Chris will tell you, we have discussions. Neil Gow's a good example. So the Neil Gow manuscripts, he'll have written tunes for the fiddle that maybe include like a concert G sharp that the pipes don't play. So the first two times through the tune, I always insist on playing it exactly as Neil Gow. I always insist on playing it exactly as the Neil Gow recorded the manuscript, and then when Chris comes in, we'll change it to a G natural in order to make it work together. Or we do a set of tunes from the St Kilda, where, for example, Bronte plays an air, a St Kilda air, completely on our own. In order for people just to purely, I think for me it's something I quite like people hearing purely melody at times, just to hear the melody in its simplest form. But then other pieces, particularly where the piano and the guitar or the bass are involved, and maybe where it's involving some of our own tunes, we would maybe experiment a bit more with some harmonies and various things. But I mean, to give you one example of something, this is maybe, I don't know if it's a good example or not, but say something like amplification, for example. It's a bit like you mention like in classical music. So you're playing Bach, for example. There'd be often a debate on the violin whether to play with vibrato or not to play with vibrato. And the argument often goes round in circles, and one person will argue one way and somebody will argue another way. For example, in traditional music, say the subject of amplification. Now, I always think, my own perspective is I like to play without amplification. I like the violin to sound as natural as it possibly can. So without the aid of a microphone where possible, and people can then just hear the instrument. And I think about the fact that Neil Gow, for example, played in these great big ballrooms in Perthshire, Blair Castle, for example, in these great big stone rooms, and he wouldn't have any microphone. There would be no access to any amplification. So he would have played, say, with his dance band, or Nathaniel Gow's son had a dance band, and it'd be purely a question of them projecting and hearing the sound of the instruments in that space. I could argue that it's authentic, therefore, to play in that manner. But I mean, if Neil Gow was alive today, somebody could very easily argue, well, Neil Gow would say, for goodness sake, you've got access to a microphone. We didn't have access to that. You've got access to amplification, or you've got access to a bigger quality of fiddle, and you can use them. Why are you not using all these microphones? I've got no idea on that, because Neil Gow is not alive today, so we've no way of knowing what his opinion. And ultimately, I suppose that's where I draw the line with the discussion, is to say I find a lot of things that people argue about in connection with a lot of these things they don't really have an answer. It's a bit, again, going back to J.S. Bach. I mean, he's not alive today, so whether he would have preferred the sound of the fiddle players at his generation playing, or the great virtuosi of the 20th century, I don't know. You've maybe got an opinion on that, James, yourself, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure where the argument goes.
Yeah, I mean, when I used to be involved in folk music or traditional music years and years ago, and there was always a debate about whether we should use guitars and bouzouki and banjos even, and all this sort of thing. And I don't have any strict views on it. But Chris, in the world of Scottish piping, there are some very strict traditions that people feel that they've got to adhere to. And I've noticed that some of the fierce debates there from the traditionalists, who get very annoyed at some of these young players with their bending of notes and different approaches to fingering and
playing those funny notes. Aye.
Yeah, is that something that is that a debate is that an argument you've ever had with people, or where do you stand?
Yeah, kind of. Traditional music for me is an evolving music. It changes from day to day. It's an oral tradition. It wasn't written down. You play it different ways every time you pick up the instrument. You'd repeat a tune, you'd play it different the second time you played it to the first. You'd play with whatever instruments were travelling through where you lived. You would play with whatever instruments where you travelled to. And I think that's how traditional music evolves, and I think that's important. I mean, in the piping world, yeah, when I grew up, if you played a C natural, that was a funny note. It's just alternative fingering that gives you a more chromatic chanter, scale, and opens more doors for musically what you can play and what you can create. So I'm not a big one for sticking to tradition. I think I hold the tradition very, very high. I think it's very, very important, and I guess that's why I still play in traditional settings, because it keeps technique, it keeps tone, it keeps all the aspects that can maybe slip, keeps them high. But it's an evolving instrument. It has to move. It has to grow like anything. And I think it is doing, and I think there's less and less of a debate now than there was 20 years ago. It's more prominent, it's more visible. Social media, access to recordings, to old recordings as well, along with new recordings. You know, it's people, young musicians can listen to any style of music. You know, a piper playing jazz, why not? No, it gives lots of ideas. You listen to Fraser Fifield, what he's doing, it's fantastic. You know, progressive. Ross Ayers, all these guys have taken music to a new level, and I think that's how it keeps current, it keeps evolving, and that's why young people keep getting interested in it. But every progressive piper, certainly that I know, has originated in the traditional grounding of instruction. So they have the quality of technique, they have the quality of instrument, they have the knowledge, but they're able to then run with it and take it to new levels, which is very important for me.
Absolutely. Very, very fascinating insights from you both into all of this. And we're so looking forward to welcoming you back to the Cumnock Tryst. Just a reminder to everybody that Alastair Savage and Friends will perform in Cumnock on Friday, the 3rd of October. It's a late night event starting at 9:30 p.m. in the Dumfries Arms Hotel, which is our festival club. Alastair and Chris, we look forward to welcoming you again very soon. And thank you so much for joining me this evening.
Thanks, James.
Thanks very much, James. And also, just from my point of view, to say what a privilege it is coming down to my homeland of Ayrshire and bringing the group of friends down. It was a big privilege to play last year, so just as much so to come back down. It's extra special for me to come back down to my homeland. So I'm really looking forward to playing for the festival, and really delighted that Chris and the rest of our friends are coming down to play as well. So really looking forward to it, and we're looking forward to saying hello to everybody on that nice, hopefully it'll be a nice evening in Cumnock. Get some sunshine. Sunshine inside, if not outside.
Thank you very much.